Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Morning. It's my honor to welcome you to the opening section of the 2017 U.S. Africa Business and Economic Development Conference. I am assuming you all have the program booklet. We are going right into the welcoming remarks. I don't see the mayor here, and I also don't see the city controller who might be standing in for her if she's not able to join us during this segment of the program. So I'll go ahead and, Frank, are you around? Are you ready? I'm always ready. Okay.
Hi.
My name's JC McCauley.
I'm Naisha McCauley, and you're watching AccessTV.org.
Put together by a coalition of sponsoring organizations, and I just want to invite some of the leaders of the sponsoring organizations who are here to welcome us. Mr. Frank Dixon is the president of the Black Business Alliance, and they have been very, very integral to the preparations for this conference. So I want to invite Frank to come and give us some welcoming remarks and then also tell us some things about the BBA. Frank, you're welcome.
Good morning. First of all, I want to say thank you to everybody for coming. Foreign and domestic representatives. And as we go through the program, depending on when people are arriving, then we'll bring them up accordingly. Sometimes when you put things together and you're coordinating people from abroad and even from around the street, sometimes you have to adjust accordingly depending on the schedule. But I do want to say I'm extremely excited for the Black Business Alliance, which we are rooted here in Connecticut, to be associated with USAADO and with Emmanuel and Harold and all the rest of the amazing USAADO group that has openly invited the Black Business Alliance to participate in a empowering professional development type of event that can bring the diverse group of people together over the next couple of days. Last night we had an opening reception, which was well attended. A lot of good networking, a lot of people who met like-minded individuals that would normally not have had those conversations. People who knew each other but didn't really know what each other did, right? And that's what it's all about, connecting those dots. So, and that, segued me into, what we're about, with the Black Business Alliance. We are a just over 4-year-old 501c6 nonprofit organization, and it was formed and put together, by myself and a couple other individuals who are passionate about assisting, Black and minority businesses fully understand how and why it's so important to own your own and invest in your own. We don't exclude anyone, but our focus is on the inclusion and the education and development of, our community. And why is that important? Because it's important that you focus on that independence, that economic independence, because that segues you into decreasing some of the legacy challenges that people in the Black community and other minority communities have faced over a lifetime, right? Faced over a lifetime with the historic issues and challenges that we faced here in the United States, right? And I tend to have these conversations with some of my, foreign-born associates who, when they come to the U.S., they tend to, somehow not understand or maybe criticize in a way of the lack of community of the African American. But what I do is I educate them on the plight of the African American here in this country, right? And how that community and trust was structurally and institutionally targeted and degraded and separated. So, and after you have that educated conversation, people tend to have a different outlook, right? That's like me going into, to another country or somewhere else and just stereotyping and judging based on what I've heard, right, on the news or naysayers without actually talking to someone on the ground who lives there and educate me on why people supposedly are the way they are. So that was a driving force, along with fully understanding that the power to address the challenges in our community here, the Black community and some other minority communities, is economics, right? You tend to cure a lot of your woes and challenges when there's a couple of coins in the bank. Some reason it happens that way, right? And you can address some of the legacy lack of education issues and poverty issues and generational poverty issues when you're investing in yourself, right? So the Black Business Alliance, we have put together an amazing board of entrepreneurs, professionals, and we're steady recruiting, young talent to give us some insight and help us from all spectrums to address what we're trying to do as Black Business Alliance, which is an inclusion and an ecosystem of not only invested into the businesses in our membership, but invested into the community, right? We have 3 core pillars of the Black Business Alliance that is the foundation of our vision, which is economic development, sustainability of our businesses, and community engagement, right? Community initiatives. Not where we're driving business to our members, but our members are going to be responsible for investing back into the BBA and into the community to move it forward, to build that community again and to build the trust that has been lost, right? But we also take a psychological approach in the Black Business Alliance to help businesses understand and educate them on why, our community think the way we think, right? A lot of people didn't grow up understanding how to write a check, what a checkbook was, how to look at your P&L. That just was not a part of a majority of Black businesses and some of the other minority people in this country. So you have to learn. It's like a learning process as you grow. But what we try to do is address that, educate you, train you, not just helping you get access to capital, not just helping you this is what you need for a business plan, but understanding how all these tools work in the long run for the sustainability of your business, right? Because I want our members to turn that business over to their kids, and their kids to turn it over to their grandkids, and to continue to invest back in our community, where we control our community, our destination, where the legislators come to us, right? Like all the other groups that are out there, where they come to them and say, what can we do to help you guys help this community and help us grow? And that is through association, through alliances, through the camaraderie, through the networking, and then that's what the Black Business Alliance, our vision is, to build that many ecosystems of commerce, trade, and understanding who we are and where we need to go as people. Putting the investment back in our community. We don't exclude anyone, but we're focusing on the inclusion of where we need to go, right? That's not what we are. And I get that question, a lot. But that's not where we are, and that's not what we preach. We focus on quality, we focus on customer service, we focus on education of your businesses, and how we grow as an individual. And I'm lucky to be partnering with USAADO, and I'm fortunate and truly appreciative that the people in this room today can get an idea and meet me and meet some of the board members and understand where we are as an organization. And I want to continue growth with USAADO and all the various groups that we're going to be partnering with. So I hope you guys have picked up a Black Business Alliance brochure to get a general idea of where we are. Visit our website. Join, of course. I wouldn't be the president if I didn't ask you to join our organization. So I hope to get a chance to talk to everyone in here individually. And I know we're going to have an amazing, prosperous next couple of days. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Frank. Next, I want to call to the podium the Executive Director of the Commission on Equity and Opportunity, which is an agency or an organ of the Connecticut General Assembly. I want to invite Ms. Subira Gordon to the podium to bring her welcoming remarks. Subira, you're welcome.
I'm really short. Hi, good morning, everyone. As Emmanuel said, I'm Subira Gordon, and I'm the Executive Director for the Commission on Equity and Opportunity. We've been a partner with USAADO since its inception, right, since the beginning. And we started working on this conference. This is our third? Fourth? Yeah. This is our third. It's a pleasure to see everyone here, a lot of new faces, which is very exciting. This has been a journey. I'm not sure many of you are familiar with the long journey it's taken to get here, but it's exciting. Africa is the new frontier, and just not to get political, but what the president said the other day I thought was not a great way to describe how we look at investment in Africa and how we think of partnering with Africa. It's a continent that has many, many great resources, and I'm happy to stick around and see some of the presentations today, but I'm really, really proud of this organization. We've given a lot of time and energy to putting things together, and partnering with USAADO has been, a labor of love. It's really, really been a heavy lift, I think, for a number of years, and it's so great to see everyone here. And really exciting to see what the day has to hold. I missed last night, but I heard it was a very good program, and I'm looking forward to today and tomorrow. Thanks. Oh, and I want to commend Emmanuel for all the hard work that he does. I'm not sure he got a shout out, but Emmanuel is kind of the glue that holds this whole thing together. Without him, none of us would be here. It's been, he works very, very, very hard to put this all together. And I'm not sure anyone gave him some thanks, so we really, really need to give Emmanuel a round of applause.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Subira. Subira, is now the Executive Director of the Commission on Equity and Opportunity. Before she got elevated into higher office, she worked as the legislative assistant, right, analyst with the African American Affairs Commission, which was actually, part of how we came about was that a group of individuals who were interested in promoting enhanced business exchanges between Connecticut and African continent got together, kind of lobbied and pressured the Connecticut legislature, and they passed a bill. The first one was passed in 1997. But nobody paid attention. Another one was passed in 2009, I think it was. The AAAC, as it was then called, the African American Affairs Commission, was working with us right from the beginning. They mobilized the legislators to vote and support the bill, and on and on and on. And the executive director then, Glenn Cassis, attended countless hours of meetings, and then eventually he seconded Subira to work with us in putting the structure and planning the conference and all that. She used to drive up from Hartford to my office in Connecticut, and we used to spend a lot of hours, nuts and bolts and everything. Then, all of a sudden, because of the financial crisis we've been having in the state for some time, the state decided to combine some 3 commissions: the African American Affairs Commission, the Asian Pacific Commission, I think the Hispanic Commission, combine them into 3. We were a bit heartbroken initially because we felt that with that, the AAC was no longer there, and that's the African American Affairs Commission, and the partnership we had enjoyed with them would be gone. But to our pleasant surprise, after the 3 organizations and commissions were combined, our own Subira was appointed the executive director of the 3 put together. So now, if I want to call her, I have to call her through her aides. You know, she's now a big shot, and this time around, she delegated one of her aides, Lucia Hernandez, who has really been fantastic. I hope Lucia can join us at some point. Without the African American Affairs Commission and now the Commission on Equity and Opportunity, I doubt whether we would have gotten to where we are. So Subira, I thank you very much for your support over the years and for your hard work into this. And thanks for coming here. We appreciate you. Now, when the mayor comes, like I said, we will allow her to bring her welcoming remarks after the speaker that was speaking then might have finished. Or if the city controller comes here too, we will do the same. Without much ado, I would like to invite to the podium the representative of the Minister of Industry, Trade, and Investment of the nation of Nigeria, Dr. Okey Enelamah. He unavoidably could not be here. He had told me earlier on that he was going to make it, but because of official duties, he's representing Nigeria at the UN proceedings and so on. So he apologizes, but sent a very, very capable and able representative in the person of Mr. Femi Edun, who is the special advisor to the minister. So I would like to call up to the podium Mr. Femi Edun, the special advisor to the Minister of Industry, Trade and Investments of Nigeria, Dr. Okey Enelamah. Femi, you're welcome.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I bring the greetings of Okey Enelamah, the Honorable Minister of Industry, Trade and Investment of Nigeria, who unfortunately cannot be here today because he's still in New York on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly in a number of multilateral trade meetings with the trade ministers of several countries. So he's in that meeting at the moment, and I'm here representing him in my capacity as his special advisor. This morning, I will be speaking about the Nigerian economy, some of the things that we're doing to catalyze industry, trade, and investment. I'll talk about the opportunities, and I'll wrap up very quickly so that I can hopefully take a few questions or comments before I leave. It was very important for me to be here on time because typically it's us Nigerians who show up late. So I'm glad that I was here in time, and hopefully we will begin to change perceptions of Nigeria in the US and across the world as a place where it's great to do business, you can get great returns on your investment, there's security of life and property, and you also have a great time whilst you're doing it. So, I'll start with some facts about Nigeria. Nigeria is the largest economy in Africa. It's on account of the currency crisis that we had in the last year and a half or so. In the last 2 years, really, we've gone down from about $550 billion of GDP to just shy of 500, about 487, $490 billion. It's the largest economy in Nigeria. In Africa, it has a population of about 193 million. It's growing at about 2.5% a year. More than half of that population is below the age of 25, so it's going to keep growing for many, many years to come. By the year 2050, the Nigerian population will be the third or fourth largest in the world at about 400 million people, larger than the United States of America. About 57% of the population is economically active. And if you bear in mind the fact that we have so many young, that explains why only 57% of the population is economically active. We have abundant natural resources, the most important and the most visible being petroleum, lots of crude oil and gas. We are actually a big gas field with some oil in it, because we have a lot more gas than oil. There's enough gas in the ground and offshore Nigeria to supply the whole of Europe for 15 years. We have a vibrant financial system. We have the second largest stock market in Africa after South Africa. We have 7 of the top 25 banks in Africa being Nigerian banks. I myself, I'm an investment banker who's on a sabbatical advising the government. The Honorable Minister whom I'm representing here is also, a Harvard Business School alum who was running the largest private equity fund in Nigeria before he got called into service. We are politically stable, and we like to make a big deal of that these days, because just day before yesterday in New York, I was responding to somebody who said Nigeria is a military dictatorship, and I said, no, it's not. We became an independent country in 1960, and we had civil government until 1966 when we had our first military coup, and we went in and out of military dictatorship. In 79, we returned to democracy, but unfortunately that experiment lasted just 4.5 years before the soldiers came back. But we finally managed to send them back where they belong in 1999, and we've had consecutive elections since then, every 4 years without fail. And in 2015, we also did something that's one of the marks of a mature democracy, because for the first time, there was a peaceful and orderly transition of power from a ruling party to an opposition party. And we now have a government that's led by what used to be the opposition in government. Our president has had some challenges with his health, and he spent quite a bit of time in the UK getting medical treatment. In those times, the vice president has managed the country in an extraordinary fashion without any disruption or difficulty. So we like to think of ourselves now as a mature democracy. English is the official language, and sometimes I get asked, how come you speak English? You're from Nigeria, isn't that in Africa? English is the official language. We were a British colony for many years before we got independence, so the official language in Nigeria is English. We have over 250 different language and dialect groups, so it just makes sense for us to speak English. GDP per head on a purchasing power parity basis, about $5,900 right now, and growing. So that's Nigeria in terms of just a snapshot of what the economy is like. Long term, we think the fundamentals are very strong on the back of population growth, on the back of urbanization, on the back of the trend towards the structural diversification of the economy away from dependence on crude petroleum to manufacturing and services. We have a telecommunications sector that between 2001 and 2 years ago was the fastest growing one in the world, because we went from the privatization of the sector in 2001 when mobile licenses were issued. We went from 400,000 telephone lines to over 80 million. And in that time, some of the investors who put money behind the digital mobile licenses, investors in MTN and Airtel and Glo and Etisalat, which recently left the country, the fourth operator, investors returned something between 40 and 60 times their original investment, just off the back of the growth in the telecom sector. So that's the same kind of growth that we expect to unleash in the power sector as we open that up to private capital. It's the same thing we expect to see in infrastructure. We're concessioning our airports, and I'll talk about some of the opportunities later, but we think that the long-term fundamentals are extremely compelling. We think that Africa is the last growth frontier globally, and we think that Nigeria is clearly the largest and the standout opportunity in Africa, however you cut the numbers. In response to the drop in oil prices that happened about 2 years ago, we implemented an economic recovery and growth plan that's aimed at restoring inclusive growth in the economy, investing in the skills and capabilities of our people, and building a globally competitive economy. To achieve that, we're doing a number of things. One is stabilizing the macroeconomic environment. And to do that, we're trying to make sure that we have the right monetary, fiscal, and trade policies in place. We're accelerating non-oil revenue generation, improving non-oil tax collections, improving the contribution of manufacturing and services to the economy, cutting costs and waste in government, privatizing public enterprises, just to make sure that we have a leaner, fitter, more joined-up government. We're also working hard to achieve agricultural and food security. Nigeria is one of the largest importers of wheat in the world, is the largest importer of rice in the world, is a major importer of sugar, and in the last 3 years, we have cut our rice import bill by 40%, and by the end of 2019, just with the growth in the acreage under rice and rice yields and rice output, by 2019, we will actually be self-sufficient in rice production. Our agronomy is not that great for wheat, but we're also finding that we can grow certain types of wheat in Nigeria, so we're reducing our dependence on imported food. We're also doing the same thing with sugar. We're also trying to make sure that we have energy sufficiency both in power and petroleum products. So increasing power generation in Nigeria is one of the biggest business opportunities on the African continent. We're working to improve transportation infrastructure, and we're driving industrialization with a particular focus on small and medium scale enterprises. So, at the Federal Ministry of Industry, Trade and Investment, where we are active for the policy framework and the implementation of the Nigerian Economic Recovery and Growth Plan, there are 3 core pillars of our effort. One is the implementation of what we call the Nigerian Industrial Revolution Plan. I'll talk about that in a few minutes when I break that out into the sector focus of the plan. But the idea behind the Nigerian Industrial Revolution plan is to get industrialization going again and create manufacturing jobs. The second is to support the growth of SMEs because they make a phenomenal contribution to job creation. And if you're looking for inclusive growth, growth that carries everyone along and ensures that we don't have to wait 2 generations for the trickle-down effect for people to benefit from growth, you've got to focus on SMEs. So there's a particular focus on SMEs, improving skills, improving training, improving access to finance. And I'm directly involved with that because one of the things that I do in addition to my responsibilities for our Special Economic Zones program is I sit on the board of one of our development finance institutions, the Bank of Industry, that provides subsidized credit on concessional terms to SMEs as well as large enterprises. But there's a particular focus on giving easy credit to SMEs to ensure that they can grow and develop their businesses. The third thing that we're doing is supporting the digitalization of the economy. So we know from the economic history of the 20th century that light manufacturing towards heavy industry has been the pathway for growth. So the United States built the railroads, got manufacturing going, and became the powerhouse of the world. As the US and Western Europe got successful, and after the Second World War, as costs went up, manufacturing started going towards Asia. And in the 70s, the Japanese built their manufacturing. And as the Japanese became successful with that and costs went up as a consequence of their success, it moved to the Asian tigers and moved from the Asian tigers to China. Now it's moving from China to places like Vietnam and Sri Lanka and Africa. So it's our turn to benefit from the growth of manufacturing. But we also understand that ICT, the new economy, allows us to get a double whammy. We can get the benefit of old economic growth as well as new economic growth. So we are focused as well on ensuring the digitalization of the economy. So now that we have digital mobile, everybody's got a cell phone, almost everyone's got a smartphone. We think that digitalization will help us to create lots more jobs in the new economy as well. So we get the benefits of both the old economy and the new. So to make all of these things happening, we're working on what we call an enabling business environment, or ease of doing business. I'll talk about that a bit more. We are developing special economic zones because whilst we're building out infrastructure to make sure that there's power everywhere, there's connectivity, there's transportation, there's good infrastructure all over the country, we can't wait. So whilst we're waiting to build it out all over the country, we're focusing on special zones where we will focus attention on making sure that in the short term, there are oases of excellence and sanity where there's world-class infrastructure that allows manufacturers to work and create jobs in the short term. So we're developing special economic zones. We are also working on our trade agreements to ensure that we have 21st century trade agreements. And to do that, we've brought back one of the top professionals in trade globally, who happens to be a Nigerian, who's leading our trade office. We are also working very hard to attract domestic and foreign investment. We spent all of this week in New York talking to international investors and trying to tell our story. But to make all of these things happen, we're institutionalizing the structural reform agenda by doing things that are almost irreversible, and also by building a national coalition and a national consensus around the big things that need to happen, so that irrespective of which government is in power, irrespective of who's running things, we're still doing the same things in a connected and joined up way. Experience and history shows us, and all the evidence is there, that there's a very strong correlation between economic prosperity and the ease of doing business. So the countries that have been most successful and the economies that have done best are also the ones that have made it easy for people to invest and do business. So one of the things that we're really focused on is moving Nigeria from the bottom of the heap towards the top in terms of ease of doing business. We're working very hard to make Nigeria a much easier place to go into to do business. So we think of that in terms of the movement of people, the movement of capital, and the movement of goods. We're making it easier for people to move back and forth between Nigeria. I'll talk about that in a bit more detail in a minute. We're working very hard to make our ports and our airports easier for goods to go in and out of. We're also enhancing our capital movement rules. Already we have very liberal capital rules that make it very easy for people to bring capital into Nigeria and to take it out. We had a currency crisis that, forced us in the short term to tighten up the way we manage foreign exchange, and we had exchange controls, but all that's gone now, and investors are able, as they have always done in the past, to take their money into Nigeria and bring it out freely without any difficulty. Okay. I think it's telling me something.
Just press the escape and then continue.
Right, thank you. So, in terms of improving the business climate and making it easier to do business, the president, through the vice president while he was away, signed an executive order mandating every single ministry, department, and agency of government to make it easier for people to do business with government, get approvals out of government, get permits from government, and just get government out of our way. So we have reduced the time it takes to register a business from 10 to 2 days. So now in 48 hours, you can register a business and you can get your certificate of incorporation electronically. We've reduced the time it takes to import and export goods by 50%, and we're still working towards our target, which is to ensure that within 24 hours, anything that comes on a boat gets through the ports on the way into Nigeria, and anything that's coming off a truck going out of Nigeria leaves within 24 hours. We've reduced the time it takes to process a visa to go to Nigeria to 48 hours. And we've also made it possible for business people going into Nigeria to get visas on arrival. We've passed laws strengthening our credit bureau and creating a collateral registry that allows small and medium-scale enterprises to use a wider range of assets as collateral and to be able to get their loans processed faster. We've reduced the number of days it takes to register property from 77 to 30, and we're aiming for 2. We've reduced the number of days it takes to get construction permits from 42 days to 20, we're aiming for 5. We've reduced the time it takes to get connected to the grid, and now it is possible within less than a week for startup businesses to get connected to electric power. So we're working on improving transparency. We're working on making sure that people can get approvals from government, such that if you submit an application and the government does not respond within the designated time, it is deemed that you have received the approval. We're working hard to improve the entry experience of visitors into Nigeria. And one of the things that we're doing is also bringing in some of the biggest players in airports to come and take over the concessions to run our international airports and upgrade them to world-class standards. We're also improving what's happening in our ports, in our seaports. And we're moving towards one government where the interface with government in Nigeria will be an electronic interface on a screen where you can talk to every agency of government, where you don't have to submit forms twice to different agencies of government, and where things are done, not with pieces of paper anymore, but with electronic trails and electronic signatures. So we're making fairly good progress with that, and we expect that we're going to be able to announce pretty interesting results before the end of this year. The Nigerian Industrial Revolution Plan aims to ensure that we're growing our GDP by about 8.5% every year over the next 3 years. We want to enhance our earnings of foreign exchange from manufactured goods. We want to create a lot more value chains, forward and backward linkages in our economy, And we want to do that by increasing our use of local raw materials and the things where we have comparative advantage in. We're trying to encourage investments in sectors where, people with high technology, with skills and innovative approaches to doing business can bring that stuff into Nigeria to raise skill levels. And the whole idea is just to create jobs from manufacturing as well, because this allows us to accelerate inclusive growth. Manufacturing jobs are higher quality jobs than agricultural jobs or mining jobs, and they help us to improve social cohesion in the long term. Our sector focus is on agribusiness and the agro-allied sector. We have over 400,000 square kilometers of arable land in Nigeria. Nigeria is outside of the earthquake belt. It's outside of the hurricane belts. It's it's tropical weather. So it's warm all year round. Even when it's raining, it's warm. So we've got great agricultural potential. Of course, like I said earlier, we're sitting on a huge gas field with crude oil in it. So oil and gas and petrochemicals is clearly an area of focus for us. We are focused on light manufacturing because that is labor intensive, it creates lots of jobs, and it plays to the fact that we have low labor costs, and we're likely to have them for quite a while because our population pyramid is skewed towards the bottom with lots of young people. We've got over 90 proven, verified solid minerals in our cadastre, and we haven't even started exploiting those. We've got a housing deficit of over 12 million housing units that need to be built. So construction and real estate is also something that's going to drive growth. And like I said earlier, we'd like to use ICT, information and communication technology, to catalyze growth. So our NIRP is focused across these sectors on trying to drive growth. And to do that, we're improving the policy environment to make it easier for people to do business, to make it more attractive for them to do business in Nigeria. We're creating a partnership between the public and the private sector, and we're using special economic zones to create oases of excellence where there's world-class infrastructure and both hard and soft infrastructure that allows businesses to operate. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because it's a lot more focused on the domestic audience. What we're doing with free trade zones is using them as magnets for investment. So across Nigeria, we are establishing world-class facilities where there's power, there's water, there's broadband, and we're making facilities available so manufacturers can basically come and plug and play and set up their factories in tax-free, duty-free havens. A lot of our effort in the area of investment promotion is being driven by the Nigeria Investment Promotion Commission, which is responsible for improving our image, promoting investments internationally and domestically, helping investors to work through government and just holding your hand as you come into Nigeria and making sure that the experience from the decision to come into Nigeria to actually making the investment commitment is as easy as possible. And then also continuing to work with investors to do policy advocacy with government and make sure that we're pushing government in the right direction to support investors and make sure that they have the right policy framework in every sector in which they're active. Like I said, we have a trade office now that's manned by someone who used to be the second most senior person at the WTO in Geneva. What we read these days is that the WTO is not a very popular institution in the United States, but they are trade people. And we've got Chiedu Osakwe, who's a professor of international trade, who's Nigerian, who's been in trade for the last 20 years, now leading the trade office. And we're just having a lot more productive conversations because we're talking now from a perspective of competence, a perspective of knowledge, a perspective of strength. And this is what we aim to do across the entire face that Nigeria presents to the rest of the world. We want to present ourselves as serious, as professional, as competent, and ready to do business. Because we think that we have total alignment. If we do what investors require, and we help investors to be successful, we are helping Nigeria to be successful. So this is the new Nigeria, this is the face of Nigeria, and this is the attitude you will get from us as you interact with us in Nigeria now. We're not a government that's there to put roadblocks in the way. We're a government that's there to help you be successful, because when you are successful, you create jobs in Nigeria. Jobs in Nigeria create growth in Nigeria. Growth in Nigeria creates tax revenues for government in Nigeria. So there's total alignment. I think my time is up. So I'd like to stop here and just take a few questions if there are any. Thank you very much for listening.
Do we have any questions for the Special Advisor to the Minister of Industry, Trade and Investments of Nigeria?
Could you please?
Okay, sorry. Hold on.
Could you please enlighten me why Lagos is the only port? And secondly, is there a plan to open more ports?
Right. Okay. Actually, Lagos is not the only port. Lagos is not the only port. In addition to the ports of Apapa and Tin Can, which are in Lagos, we have ports in Calabar in the southeast. We have ports in Koko, which is Warri, in the south-south. We have a port in Port Harcourt, which is also in the south-south. There is a port that is planned, it's been already approved and licensed, the deep sea port in Akwa Ibom, which is also outside Lagos, in addition to the ports of Lekki and Badagry, which are planned for the Lagos area. So no, Lagos is not the only port. There are lots of ports apart from Lagos.
That's a very, very impressive presentation of an impressive program. And I wonder if Nigeria is collaborating with its neighbors to spread the good word. Because it seems to me that you have created a model that is applicable elsewhere. Obviously, Nigeria wants to get ahead of the pack, but it seems to me that this is an exportable model of how to do this kind of business.
Okay. Well, thank you for your kind words, but first let me say that this is not original. None of these ideas are really original as far as Nigeria is concerned. This is just how countries have developed, and we have borrowed these ideas from other countries. Second, we are part of a number of regional initiatives in West Africa and the whole of Africa as well. So there's ECOWAS, which is the West African Economic Area, of which Nigeria is about 45%. But there's an ECOWAS Free Trade Initiative that is being driven, and the whole trade discussion is actually being led and spearheaded by Nigeria. In addition to that, there's something called the CFTA, which is the Continental Free Trade Area. And that's across all of Africa. And that's been spearheaded by Nigeria, South Africa, Kenya, and Egypt. And the gentleman I spoke about a few minutes ago, Chiedu Osakwe, is actually chairing that. And the whole idea is to improve intra-African trade from the current pitiable levels to much higher levels by generally just moving the barriers to intra-African trade away. And a big part of that is, in addition to the rules, improving the ease of accessibility, improving logistics and connections in Africa. So there's discussion around open skies in Africa, there's discussion around open borders in Africa, in addition to harmonizing the trade environment. So we are sharing experience. And I was speaking to a gentleman from Ethiopia while we were having coffee upstairs. In July, we went to Ethiopia to see the industrial park that was built in Hawassa, which is got a U.S. corporation, PVH Inc., as the anchor investor. PVH owns the brands Calvin Klein, Tommy Hilfiger, Izod, Van Heusen, and a number of others. They're the anchor investor for that industrial park. So there are jeans and shirts and underwear and all sorts of garments stamped made in Ethiopia coming out of there. Already 10,000 jobs have been created in that park, and they, have got big ambitions. And the minister in charge of that project, who's like the coordinating minister for the economy in Ethiopia, spent 2 days with us just telling us about his experience, introducing us to the people they've worked with, and we are starting a collaboration with pretty much the same investors to do the same thing in Nigeria. So as we share our own experience with others, we're also learning from and benefiting from our neighbors as well.
Mr. Edun, thank you again for joining the conference and sharing the current future state of the Nigerian economy. Could you talk a little bit more about the aspects of bringing in subject matter experts to assist you guys in achieving some of those future goals? Maybe the subject matter experts from other countries, and what that looks like and how someone would get involved in assisting you guys, maybe as a contractor or things of that nature. Could you expand a little bit more on that?
Okay. We're doing that at different levels, and perhaps I should just illustrate to explain. So on one level, to bring in subject matter experts into the whole area of attracting investment. So the minister was brought in with his background in business and private equity, and he's put a team together of people who are coming from similar backgrounds. So I've been 30 years in financial services, working in investment banking, corporate finance, and starting out from public accounting to consulting. And the lady who's running the Investment Promotion Commission used to be one of the leading investment bankers in the country. The guy who's running the trade office used to be at the WTO, and so forth. So that's one level. On another level, there are experts in specific areas. So we're trying to develop special economic zones. We're working with the World Bank and UNIDO, who've worked with several other countries. They've worked with Ethiopia and Vietnam. Vietnam was the top destination globally for foreign direct investment last year. Ethiopia was number 2. So the guy who was running UNIDO in Ethiopia is running it in West and Central Africa now, and he's put a team of 5 people together to work with us on our SEZ program. The World Bank has given us grants for our Special Economic Zone program, and we've put resources behind it as well. We've hired one of the top consulting firms in the world, Bain & Company, to work with us. So the Bain team is working with me on that program. So when we need talent, we'll look everywhere we can find it, and we recognize that we have to pay for it as well. So we're very open to attracting top drawer talent. We want to bring the best companies, world-class companies, to come into our country. To do that, you have to make a world-class pitch. And to make a world-class pitch, you have to be advised by world-class professionals. So this is the approach we're taking. So we're open for business as far as getting professional assistance is concerned.
Go ahead. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, Mr. Edun, I really like the presentation you guys gave us. I want to find out, how is Equinje handled in Nigeria?
Well, our president took office promising to fight corruption. And I think most of the people who know him, have met him, will also tell you that they've checked him out, and he checks out as being personally an upright and incorruptible president. We are working in the federal ministry with a budget in hundreds of millions of dollars, And I think one of the things that you will hear from all of the parties that we have spoken to, investors who talk to us, the service providers who have worked with us, is that nobody has been asked for a penny, a cent, a dollar, or in any other currency for any form of bribery or gratification in our program. So that's what we're doing. We're basically just putting our bona fides on the table and say, if you find the experience, let us know about it.
So, which means you have like a department that handles situations like that. Let's say if I go there and I realize or I sense something like that, is there a department I can just call and report that to them?
Right. So Egunje is a word in one of our local languages for bribery or gratification. So we have the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission in Nigeria, which has the statutory responsibility for, identifying and prosecuting perpetrators. So if you identify that type of problem, you can go to the EFCC. This government has instituted a whistleblower program where whistleblowers actually do receive up to 5% of the proceeds of crime as a result of their whistleblowing. So there have been a number of whistleblower prosecutions in Nigeria. You can check that online. But you will also hear that a few whistleblowers are also being prosecuted for having blown the whistle wrongly.
Wrongly?
Because where the prosecution found that they blew the whistle maliciously or without a grounding in facts, we have to keep the whistleblower program clean. So first you prosecute perpetrators, but you also ensure that it doesn't become an instrument for vendettas and vengefulness.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. But most importantly, the way to really ensure this is that you bring people into government that have the right values. So most of us who are serving in this program are volunteers. For example, I'm not paid by government. I am volunteering 100%. Yeah.
We can take Femi, what's the time? We have to get you at the train
It's
station.
now 10:35, and I have,
5 more minutes to leave.
I need to leave here at 10:45.
10:45. So, any more questions? Okay. Jude.
Good morning, everyone.
Yes.
My name is Chidi Owo. Thank you for your speech.
Thank you, Chidi.
I just have a little question.
Sure.
At the beginning of President Buhari's administration, we noticed a fall in the dollar-naira rate. I mean, the exchange rate went high. And at the same time, there was a subsidy. I'm not sure the term to use, but there was a subsidy in the exchange rate given to those who went on Hajj trip. I've been trying to rationalize this in light of the government's commitment to transparency, fairness, and efficiency. Could you throw more light on this, please? Thank you.
Yeah. Well, I first will acknowledge that those things did happen, but I think what you will see now, Chidi, is that most recently the Central Bank of Nigeria has worked to achieve convergence in the rates in the various windows at which foreign exchange is being sold, so that lack of transparency that you talk about is gradually being eliminated as we move more in favor of markets. So basically what you see being reflected in that lack of transparency was the contest between markets and administrative controls in the management of a scarce resource. And I think that argument has been won and lost. It's very clear that markets work, and markets are the best way to allocate scarce resources. And that's why you see the central bank moving more towards market mechanisms now for the allocation of foreign exchange. Unfortunately, there are a number of longer-term issues that we do need to address in Nigeria, like in every other country, where policy just needs to be aligned a lot more towards development and towards what our real priorities should be. So until we get there, we will continue to see some of these distortions that you talk about. But I think if we focus on the big picture, what we'll see is that largely the trend is positive towards efficiency, and the trend is positive towards more reliance on markets for the allocation of scarce resources. I hope that answers.
Thank you very much. Any other questions? Any other questions?
So, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Femi, for coming. Convey our special regards to the minister. Yes. It's my honor to welcome to the podium Mr. Leland Hazelwood, who has been a diplomat to Africa. He has a very rich, productive connection to the African continent. He has worked with presidents of many African countries, including people like Nelson Mandela, the leader of the president of Rwanda, and so on and so forth. And he consults with Fortune 500 companies who are interested in doing business in Africa. He has a bestseller, The Ultimate Guide to Doing Business in Africa. So we invited him to talk about how is it that you actually get into the African market and succeed in doing business in Africa from somebody who has lived in Africa, who has helped businesses succeed in Africa, and who also has a U.S. perspective. Without much ado, I want to invite to the podium Mr. Leland Hazelwood. Let's put our hands together, please, for him.
Well, thank you very much for the invitation, for the introduction, and thank you very much for the invitation to speak today. I'd like to thank the previous speaker because he said so many things that I had in mind, and his presentation does give a clear indication of the types of things that are happening in Africa that are very conducive to improving the business environment for companies that are interested in going into Africa. I am making my presentation from the perspective of a businessman, and the types of issues that I envisage an American business person in particular needing to have addressed and questions to have answers to in their search for opportunities in Africa and just looking at Africa in particular. Well, the first thing I did, as you notice, was to remove the African market to emphasize African markets. And that was done specifically for emphasis because too often people just think of Africa, the broad landmass, as one undifferentiated area, and it reflects a mindset that suggests a reluctance or inability to check what's really happening in that continent and check into the particulars and the details. And this mindset, of course, causes lots of opportunities to go unrecognized. Well, what I'm going to do is, my presentation really would be in two halves. Strategic considerations from a business person's perspective. And as I present, it's presented in such a way where you can I try to draw out some implications from just general business strategic issues with specific reference to Africa. And this is based primarily on my experience in doing business in Africa. And I thought that some of the points that I try to make would be relevant to someone who is interested in doing business in Africa, or is new to business in Africa, or who's operating in business in Africa, but also could benefit with some suggestions. Excuse me. Because I've worked in Africa for a long time, for 40 years now. I worked on advisor to government level, major development projects. I've helped to develop entrepreneurial initiatives. But perhaps the most interesting thing that I could distill and share has been my experience with working with African companies as consultants to those companies on the ground in Africa, and experiencing and seeing the types of issues that companies face on a day-to-day basis. And I try to distill that in the second part of my presentation, where I give some suggestions as to how one might prepare him or herself to enter the African continent. And I suggest some rules to reduce risk and to operate successfully. Businesses look for increasing sales, income, and things. That's generic. And that perhaps frequently is a motivation for wanting to do business overseas. And with Africa as a target. I'm just going to go through some of these issues and just make just little comments, because these are generic business strategic business issues. And the first comment I'd like to make is the temptation is you have excess capacity, and here are developing countries that perhaps do not subscribe to the same quality standards and other standards, and it is possible to dump your merchandise. Wrong. Not if you're thinking of seriously thinking of becoming a global player in business. And that's the way to go today, in spite of our current emphasis on nationalism. The reality is that we live in a global environment, and the survival of business depends on their ability to function and integrate themselves in a global environment, that is to get their products and services in as wide a market as possible around the world. If you don't do that, your competitor from elsewhere will do it for you, to you, will come into your marketplace, so that you have to be conscious. And I could give an example. I once was advising a company that had some of the finest liquors in the world. They won all of consistently the wine and spirit competitions in Britain, and was advising them to get into South Africa. But eventually, after we went through all of the approvals and what have you, they were given the option of they bottled their liquor in a 70 centiliter bottle, milliliter bottle, and centiliter rather, and most liquors are sold in 750 milliliters and bottles. And so they were given the option of putting just a tab covering it and just filling the bottle to the 750 milliliters and without redoing their label. Well, of course, this was Africa. Africa will accept anything, you know. So they got the first container in, and it was a real embarrassment, and it tugged at my heart to go into the liquor stores and see the best liquor in the world in that particular category looking so shabby among many other inferior quality liquors. That company did not last very long. So I just give that to you by way of illustration. I think I've tried to make the point that business is all global, and so companies are fighting for global market share. And Africa presents itself as an interesting platform. And one of the reasons is because Africa, as you could see from the previous presentation, and this is one of the more developed countries in Africa, they're now trying to get manufacturing going, so that most manufacturers are imported into Africa, and they come from everywhere. They come from all the countries in Europe. They come from China, Japan, Brazil. So it is a great place to test your brand and your service if you want to be a global player. And I submit that any serious business has to think and plan in global terms today. Diversifying risk by finding new markets, it's a natural. Stabilizing seasonal fluctuations, that's also, Africa to a degree offers, for instance, I lived in South Africa for many years, and at this time of the year, it's just beginning spring they're moving into summer. So when it's winter here, it's summer over there in southern Africa, which creates interesting opportunities to exploit those types of differences in terms of how you promote your product in Africa and overseas. There are differences in lifestyle. Life cycles of products. Styles and fashions change very rapidly here. Sometimes something that's old here or conventional could be very important in Africa. So it's an opportunity to extend, and this is not being insulting to Africans, because that product could be very appropriate and could be represent an advancement. So it's impossible to improve to extend the life cycle of your product. You could, and in so doing, you could take care of any excess capacity. And gain access to additional resources, which may make a difference in the quality of your product that you're able to promote. So, with the changes that are taking place in Africa, they represent new opportunities to integrating the new enterprises that are emerging in your value chain, either as suppliers that may give you a competitive advantage because of cost structures, or as a demand end of the chain, emerging businesses that now can represent your market. And you heard the previous presentation about the efforts of Africa to become the new manufacturing center. I've experienced that firsthand as an advisor to the government of Rwanda in investment promotion, particularly manufacturing. And frequently, we were visited by the Chinese, who were very much anxious in relocating a lot of their manufacturing into Africa. And well, I was just in Rwanda, and Rwanda seemed to be one of the focuses. Because of rising labor costs in China, in part because of the result of previous policies of the one child in the family, and an aging population, prosperity, higher income and wages. And so there is an opportunity in China, in Africa now, to play a very important role. But they must compete with Cambodia, Vietnam, and some of the Asian countries, and Latin America and the Caribbean. My observation is that African countries are very well positioned to be successful in their endeavors. Now, another business motivation that surprisingly many businesses are not aware of are specific programs and representing tariff concessions and market entry opportunities that are offered specifically to African countries, African and other developing countries, but specifically in some respects to African countries. For instance, AGOA, the African Growth Opportunity Act. This is the United States government assistance to Africa to encourage African countries to engage in manufacturing and to develop manufacturing. And AGOA allows manufactured and products produced in Africa of a very wide range to enter into the US market with concessionary or no tariffs at all. Many people are not really aware of it, but surprisingly, the Chinese are aware of it. And, and this is an incentive for Chinese industry to produce in Africa, because we do not make the distinction as to whether it's a European or Chinese manufacturing facility. As long as the goods are produced in Africa and the content is African majority content, it will get access into our market. Surprisingly, not many of our businesses are aware of it. And so I hope that those of you who are contemplating going into Africa would explore that also. As a matter of fact, some of the illustrations with the operations in Ethiopia are exploiting the AGOA very successfully. A famous one is a shoe manufacturer in Ethiopia that's Chinese owned, completely Chinese owned, that's been set up to supply the US market. So why not American companies go, it's another way to increase your competitiveness by going overseas to come back in. See. Then there are EPAs, Economic Partnership Agreements. This is with the European countries. This is, as most of Africa were former colonies, they had special arrangements with the European colonizers. There were special British Commonwealth tariffs for the British colonies. The French had special arrangements. And as the European Union coalesced and came together, these arrangements were altered. First, they were called the Lomé Convention and the Cotonou Convention, and then they were folded into the EPAs, Economic Partnership Agreements. And there's an organization in Brussels, ACP, the ACP organization that pays attention to this and supports companies. But the bottom line is, this is another opportunity to set up production facilities in Africa and in order to gain concessionary access to European markets. So here we have access to the US market and access to European markets through these two facilities, these two arrangements. And there are other arrangements. I've just used these as an example, because many of the countries have special bilateral agreements with other countries, with Japan, with China. So it should be of interest to American businesses to explore these types of facilities using Africa as a manufacturing or production platform. Something else to look at is I try to focus you on individual countries as against Africa, the continent as a broad landmass. But the previous speaker did mention ECOWAS and some of the other arrangements. These are regional economic communities that are being organized to reduce tariffs and more or less have to become independent trading areas tariff-free. And there are 8 such in Africa. There's the Maghreb, there's Central Africa, there's ECOWAS, there's East Africa. There's another group that takes in Ethiopia, Djibouti, Eritrea. There's SADC in the south. There's COMESA, about 23 countries. So here you have African countries that have come together in order to broaden the market and expand the market, which makes it more attractive for business to examine those markets. Then there are other things such as, and this is just one example, Power Africa. About 60% of the African continent, about estimated 600 million people, go without electricity. And so in 2013, our government decided that we will do something about it, and initially put $7 billion into the kitty. I think it's probably more than $40 billion right now that's available for anyone who is interested in becoming a player in the power industry and providing power within Africa. The Europeans are also helping, providing technical and other forms of assistance, and as well as funds. So here is a whole industry that just from these programs alone, that's easily about $50 billion to be explored. And there are very specific targets that they're going after, aggressive targets to double the supply of electricity in sub-Saharan Africa between now and 2030. So these are areas where one can play. But then many businesses also seem to have an ideological position where they just don't want to be involved with the government. And some of these international organizations, multilateral organizations at the World Bank, et cetera, but these organizations provide funds and facilities to assist businesses that help to reduce risk in areas to the extent that you may find a market particularly risky. So it is important to take a look at these types of facilities, and they have different agencies, but it's not my to go into it right now. But it also suggests, it opens up opportunities for, because African governments are poor and they don't have all of the facilities, for PPPs, public-private partnerships, joint ventures with local entrepreneurs, as well as with entrepreneurs from other countries, because they bring to the table certain concessions. So you have the concessions from our government, and then you joint venture with a Swedish company that has certain types of concessions, and you could put a package together to mitigate a great deal of risks and have access to interesting markets. Then you have access through the EPAs and AGO and what have you to a variety of markets. But you must be aware of these programs, and strategically and tactically, really, you must be able to work through them. So I think I made the point that Africa is a great platform to test the integration of your global strategy as an integrated global company. Now, I'm just going to go over this very quickly. I'm a troubadour for Africa. I have lived there so long, and I've seen so many changes, and many of I think you got the impression from the last, how the important things and how serious Africans are going about the business of. I'll just leave that up there. But let me say this. When I started in Africa 40 years ago, the best way I could illustrate it you speak to an African and they would say, well, peut-être, perhaps. There's a degree of uncertainty in decision making and in their fears. Then you may hear, inshallah, and that has nothing to do with Allah or God. It has everything to do, I try my best, but I don't make the final decision. You see? But I have seen that progression, and I have seen the change. And I think a dramatic moment was with the World Cup in South Africa in 2010. I happened to be there. And I like to say that was the Waka Waka moment for Africa. When Shakira sang Waka Waka, this time for Africa, I think of Africa was announcing to the world that, look, we arrived, we want to take care of our business, and we think we can take care of our business. Yes, we have come out of a colonial situation. We've had a lot of problems, structural adjustments, and all sorts of different debt crises, and all sorts of crises that have defined our image of Africa. But Africa was saying, we're ready. And I have seen that transition, and this is why I'm a troubadour for Africa. Right. Thank you very much. But the truth is, 7 of the 10 fastest growing countries in the world are African economies. They have been growing at much faster rates than the US, Europe, Latin America, the Caribbean, only second to Asia, and that is because of China. And I was so pleased to hear that Nigeria is projecting 8% growth rates, because if Nigeria could achieve that, Africa will surpass Asia, because Nigeria and South Africa have been dragging the rest of the continent down in terms of growth rate. Nigeria has not really been growing very much, and so has South Africa. And these are the 2 largest economies in the continent. Other countries like Ethiopia, Tanzania, Cote d'Ivoire, and so on, have been growing at very impressive rates, even though those rates have been moderated within the last 2 years, because as a reflection of their relationship with China, which has decided to pull back some of its investment in trade, but primarily trade, which has affected the African continent significantly, and the countries that are the oil-producing countries have also been seriously hit because of the experience in our own country in becoming more and more self-sufficient with regard to oil. But there's the Millennial Development Goals, which were entered into 2000 and ended in 2015, there were impressive achievements in reduction of poverty, extreme poverty, as against just poverty. The fight still goes on to reduce poverty, but there were many successes, which leads to believe that, to suggest and to support the fact that the economic and administrative management of African economies has improved significantly, and it gives encouragement for the Sustainable Development Goals. So any businessman who is interested in doing business in Africa should take a look at the unmet needs as they have been defined under these programs. And this should give them some at least preliminary or initial indications of areas in which they may function. I have seen improved administration. I've seen a youthful population that's uninhibited. I'm old enough to have seen the transition from colonialism to the present time. I myself was born a colonial, so I understand the feelings and the aspirations of people who are newly independent. And I've been able to observe the new youth with their aspirations and the pressure that they're putting on these societies for improvement. And improvement, of course, means economic improvement, which provides opportunities for investors, domestic and foreign. The conventional wisdom that Africa is a place of coups, and I've experienced many coups. I've been stuck in airports and what have you. But the truth is, more African governments are experiencing transformation and change through elections. And coups are not being tolerated to the extent that they might have been 10 years ago. So if you look very carefully at the experience, there has been a significant improvement in this regard, and that augurs very well for the future of the continent. Foreign direct investment has remained relatively steady. Around 2014, 2015, when the world saw a decline in foreign direct investment, it rose in Africa. They had been, 2016, a little bit moderation, but no significant decline in terms of foreign direct investment. There's a growing middle class with discretionary buying power. The benefits of tertiary education are being felt. A lot of Africans are being educated at home, and it's having an impact. There is a greater willingness for entrepreneurial activities. I've been very much involved in promoting entrepreneurial in different parts of Africa. The regional economic communities, their progress, and have you heard, there's the long-term goal of a continental-wide customs union or trading area, which it is a long-term vision, but not something, but something that business should pay attention to. So, in spite of this progress, there are many unmet needs, human needs, and we could talk about them in terms of infrastructure, health, education, you name it. These are developing countries and they aspire to be like us. So what they don't have now, there's that gap. So the businessmen should be encouraged to look at what that gap is and what are the things that would improve the lives of people in Africa. Here is where many business opportunities could be found. Another opportunity comes from the inadequate government capability. African governments are improving their competence, but someone asked a question about technical assistance from abroad and so on. There's a great need for assistance, not only technical assistance, but investment assistance, hence PPPs, as I mentioned earlier. So there's insufficient capital. If you're in private equity, venture capital areas, development finance, these are areas where there are large opportunities across the continent. And then, of course, I mentioned the born frees. And so just for a little bit of relief, I put that there. I happened to be in South Africa at the time when the students were protesting about the school fees. And the sign says, fees must fall. That's what the fees must fall, right? Fees must fall. And the youth is very important. The youth are the basis of future economic development and opportunity, but they can be a source of destabilization if development doesn't take place rapidly enough. One day more, South Africa might have had a problem. One day after October 14th or whatever on that paper. You see, because these are college students who were protesting and they were receiving resistance. They went to the president's office in Pretoria, see, and the next wave was to enlist high school students. And if you remember the history of South Africa, it was the high school students in 1976 on June 16th that did a lot to break the back of the apartheid, and it would have broken the present government of South Africa because they didn't have the type of inhibitions as the college students. The college students are thinking, well, gee, I want to get my degree. I want to get out and get a job. You know, the high school students said, listen, I want to get into college, and I don't want to pay fees. So in New York State, now they're trying to tend to that issue in reducing fees in the colleges. But this illustrates a certain point. These are developing countries, but they catch up fast. You know, in many areas of life, the progress is rapid because they have the opportunity to use advanced technologies and to stand on the shoulders of others, and as the former presenter indicated, to borrow from different places what works. So, how is my time doing? 10 more minutes? Okay, good. So I would advise anyone who wants to do some serious desktop research. That's really very important. It would enable you to differentiate among countries, plug into opportunities, and build your confidence, because there's going to be problems. And if the first time you run into a problem, you're discouraged, it may be because you're not sufficiently well informed. So there are many resources here in our government that you could use. You know, the Department of Commerce, Trade Administration, Foreign Commercial Service, the Small Business Administration, the Exim Bank, Department of Trade Administration, and OPIC, and on and on. And don't be bashful. Seek advice. You know, find a consultant or other persons who've been around. Determine your tactics, how you want to enter. You know, work within your organization, because you have to have buy-in, because you will have problems. And if the first time you encounter a problem, the internal politics you're sabotaged because they have not been brought up to speed as to the real opportunities. So it's important to do a lot of organizational work internally to make sure that you are ready for exporting, for international business. And you could do it in many ways: importing, exporting. You could buy, purchase local company, that type of investment. You could set up independent distributorship. You could agents relationship. And you know, an easy way is to contract with some companies that are already international. Get your product into the international stream. Now, we had a project in Burkina Faso, and we needed drill rigs, jeeps, and drilling equipment, all sorts of things. It was an opportunity for Ingersoll Rand to get into Africa. I wanted Peugeots, but I wasn't allowed to get Peugeots. I had to buy Jeep Cherokees, you know. So without even going overseas, you could start having your products exported. Look at the Power Africa that I mentioned earlier. Look at GE, become a supplier to GE, because a lot of these big companies are exploiting these opportunities. So you could become a subcontractor. So I have rules that I said. You have to get yourself psychologically prepared to deal with the issues, you know. And that, to a certain degree, means overcoming a lot of perceptions and prejudices that have been fed to you through the media about Africa. If you depend on the media, believe that Africa is just a continent of failed states, a dark continent of Ebola, coups, and revolutions and things like that. Those things are true, but not in every country, all the time. And the things that I spoke about earlier, fast growing, increasing middle class, and all, these things also are true. So you have to choose which is the fake news, and or evaluate the different pieces of it, find a framework to evaluate the different pieces of information so you have to deal with attitudes, your leadership and within your organization. You must differentiate around countries. You know, these are countries that are only 60 years or so that are independent. We are what, 300 years independent, and we are very nationalistic. So we must understand the nationalism of independent African countries. We must respect that. We must respect ethnic groups, regional groups, and things of that type. And we must show that we respect it by doing our homework. That by being able to have a conversation, if you were operating in a particular country, you should be able to know a couple of things about the country, you know, that are important. It shows respect. And not to confuse it with another country is absolute disrespect. You have to change your business models. You have to be open, you know, to different types of business models. And I could give the different examples of that. Decision making is done on a different basis, you know. It takes money, it takes a budget to develop statistics, you know. That could be spent in building a feeder road to a farm to develop the farmers so they could get their products to market. So that's the choice. The best statistics probably are in the multilateral organizations like the World Bank or USAID and what have you. So frequently you have to make business decisions on intuition, informed judgment. And this makes the case for having a good, trusted local partner who understands the environment and who could help you until you gain that type of confidence operating within the environment. Don't overreach. You will find once you're in Africa that there are lots of opportunities. And Africans would look at you and say, hi, why don't you invest in this and invest in that and what have you? Focus on what you came into initially. Can make that a success, you know, because the other aspect of it, if you get distracted and go all over the place and you're no longer a success, those other opportunities will not be available to you. So focus, and be patient. That goes along with being patient. And cultivating local knowledge. Be adequately capitalized. A lot of hidden costs that your accountant in New York or Chicago didn't contemplate. A lot of little commissions and brokerage fees that sometimes are questionable. I don't know what the word is. Sometimes we call it corruption. Sometimes it's on the edge. You don't know whether it's corruption, but these are things you have to deal with on a practical level that eventually have to find its way in the accounting records. And so those are some of the hidden costs. And then I said, this is almost a no-brainer. Recognize the government, and be a good citizen. But there's more to that that meets the eye. Laws change frequently. These are developing countries. They're changing regulations rapidly to meet their situations, to facilitate growth and what have you. And sometimes these things are not communicated well, and you could be caught in a bind. There is a great example between a large cellular company from South Africa in Nigeria that was fined $5.2 billion because of not towing the line with regard to regulations. I had the opportunity of speaking with Eric Holder, our Attorney General, who had to go to mediate and reduce the fee from $5 billion down to about $2 billion. And I had a discussion with him on it. But it was an infraction of the law, which put security risks as far as the Nigerian government was concerned. But there are other ramifications. That's just an example. Being a good citizen also, being able to share your expertise, because Africans look at you as an entity, as an organization, as individuals in your company, as bringing expertise that they would like to have, that they feel can benefit their country. Don't be stingy, share it. If even, be prepared to work with community groups, go on boards, have your spouse volunteer and do things like that. And consider it a privilege, really, to be invited to be involved in those types of things. So you have to have your vision, business vision with relevance to Africa. Do the hard work, the research in understanding the environment, and there is no, you must prepare. You must do thorough preparation and seek help if necessary, and do the types of things, the rules that I have indicated here to avoid risk and establish good government relations. What did I do? But maybe my timing isn't good. But a great way to start, of course, however, is to get my book, The Guide to Doing Business in Africa. And any questions, I'd be prepared to ask.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hazelwood. Any questions? We can take a maximum of 2. Any? Okay.
What were the 7 countries that are showing growth, and why are the Chinese pulling out?
No, the Chinese are not pulling out.
Oh, I thought you said they were.
The Chinese have retreated as a strategy. They have lowered their growth rate. They've been growing at 10% a year, and they've been doing a lot of trade with Africa. They have reduced their growth rate to about 7.6%, that they keep hitting it, so one wonders whether the statistics, how those statistics will come bad. But anyway, they've lowered their growth rate and are trying to emphasize domestic consumption. And that has had an impact on many African countries that traded with Africa. So it has affected the GDP of a number of countries, and including the importation of raw materials, minerals, and so on, that have reduced the trade, reduced the GDP. And so it's had an impact. And countries that have been, the continent has been growing above 5% between 2000 and 2015. For the last 2 years or so, the growth rate for the continent has been reduced to about 3.5%. Yeah. Yeah.
She asked about 7 countries.
Oh, the 7 countries. Oh. Well, off the top of my head, I would say Ethiopia was 1, Cote d'Ivoire, Tanzania, the Congo, but they've have some problems recently. So I've given you 4. I can't remember off the top of my head what the other countries have been.
Okay, Joyce?
I just wanted to ask, based on your own experience, is there any particular difference in women doing business in Africa or men? Is there,
Between women and men?
yes, do you have a particular guide for women?
Or a guide for women who want to do business in Africa? No, just do business. You know, just consider yourself equal with anyone else, and do business. There's no special barrier for women that I have observed. Yeah.
What sort of like 3 countries you consider to be hot markets now for companies that want to go into Africa?
But it depends on what product or service you're offering. It really depends on the product or service that you're offering.
Or maybe I could switch the question and say that provide the best environment for companies without, in terms of,
That's a tricky question. You know, I see. Nigeria is making a serious attempt to be more proactive in processing investment inquiries and so on. The little country that I was an advisor to was one of the top in the continent, Rwanda. There's Rwanda and there's Mauritius. These are the 2 African countries that lead in terms of having an inviting environment and being able to accommodate foreign investors in a good way and rapidly, without lots of bureaucracy and obstacles. Rwanda is an outstanding example in being able to collect taxes and do the types of administration that many other countries in Africa are not able to do. So it varies. It depends on what your product is, but there are opportunities in all the countries. It's just you must have your business savvy and the appropriate tactics for that particular environment.
One more.
I think my question was a piggyback on the other one lady's question here about doing business in Africa with women groups, and in particular, my question to you is, and thank you again for your presentation. It was rewarding. In terms of your background and experience, you've been there for a large number of years. Have you had the experience of working with women organizations there in Africa? And what were some of the particular consulting type projects, maybe 1 or 2, that you offered?
Okay. In South Africa, women are doing well, in different parts of Africa for different reasons. In South Africa, there are very special programs to empower women. Let me give you an example. And Frank, when you made your presentation this morning, I thought of something, and let me. The difference between a minority and a majority. I'm in South Africa. I went there initially to help develop businesses for post-apartheid South Africa. I was heading a United States government project to do that. And my job was to identify businesses that had the potential to be players in the mainstream, not mom and pop, and to create the infrastructure to make that happen. And I have had the experience of coming back to the United States. And obviously my business is a minority business. And attending one of these meetings of the large corporations and the supplier development programs that are talking about what they're going to do to minorities. And I almost felt very, very sick. I mean, genuinely sick. Because it was like something that I heard 25 years before being played to me, you know? And it took 25 years or more from the time that Nixon announced black capitalism in 1969 for us to have a first billion-dollar black company here, Beatrice Foods, Reggie Lewis. Now I go back to South Africa, you see. And some of the guys that I'm talking to about it, private equity and this and that, they're managing, within 3 years, they're managing multi-million-dollar companies, not multi-million rand, multi-million-dollar, 30 million, $100 million companies, okay? That's the difference between being a majority in a place and a minority. Now, the thing is, the South Africans decided for our country to develop, our people must develop. Our people must own the resources and so on. And so they instituted something that they call BEE, Black Economic Empowerment. And if you want a government contract, you have to show how many black South Africans are employed or female South Africans are being employed, how many, your contracts, do they go to, what percentage go to black? So it permeates the entire business environment. You cannot escape it. This is their way of trying to develop their people and trying to get people in business. And women are doing very, very well. I know women who've put up, who've created investment trusts and organizations who've bought into coal mines, diamond mines, you know, BMW dealerships in a big way, you know, and these are women. I know women who own mining companies in South Africa. So, on the one hand, I'm illustrating the difference between, you know, a serious intent to develop and lip service towards your development. So I understand your challenges. All right.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hazelwood. Remember, he has the book, The Ultimate Guide to Doing Business in Africa. And as you can tell from his presentation, he really knows what he's talking about. He has done it. He's still doing it. So you can contact him and for more customized personal advice. Thank you very much, Mr. Hazelwood. One more, then we go for lunch break. When he was making his presentation, he talked about the resources available at the federal level and so on. We are privileged this morning to have people from the Small Business Administration in Washington, D.C. We have Mr. Peter Kazamias and Eugene Cornelius. We're going to hear from Mr. Peter Kazamias first. Mr. Peter Kazamias is the Associate Director for the International Trade Agency Administration, of the Small Business Administration, all the way from Washington, D.C. Let us put our hands together as Mr. Kazanias comes to the podium. We don't need a president. No, I'm just going to have a microphone. Okay. So you have this. You also have this.
Thank you. Thank you, Emmanuel, for the warm introduction. And I want to thank Mr. Frank Dixon for the invitation to come here. Quite candidly, it's a thrill not just to be part of this discussion, but to actually, this marks the first time I've actually, in any kind of official capacity, been asked to come speak at Yale University since quarter century, since I graduated from here in 1993. So it's really, really wonderful to be back here in this capacity, I have to say. And I think it makes sense. I'm just going to read prepared remarks because the nature of my remarks are such that they are going to be informative and they're going to give you an idea of how the Small Business Administration is here to help in the manner of getting small businesses invested into other parts of the world and globalizing them. However, I see how it all fits together. What I've seen in the last two speakers is a great deal of information that talks about the incentive for U.S. businesses, small and large, to invest in Africa, for the opportunities that exist there. And I think what I'm here to talk about, and to sort of round out the fulsomeness of the presentation of this convention, is to talk about different vehicles that facilitate small businesses and large businesses to get into Africa. So with that, I'll just say that I'll be talking about how the SBA helps small businesses grow and thrive through exports, and our products and services, how they can be expanded into Africa. I am the Associate Administrator for the Office of International Trade at the Small Business Administration. Now, the SBA believes that exporting is an essential component of small business growth because 95% of the world's consumers and over 3/4 of all existing purchasing power exists outside the United States. We know that businesses that export are more financially stable, they expand faster, and they create better paying American jobs. Exporting companies pay an average of 18% higher wages than firms that do not export. Today, however, of the approximately 6 million employer firms in the country, small firms, only about 5%, roughly about 300,000, get to wear the label of exporter. We would like to improve upon this number with your help so that more U.S. small businesses can enter into the global markets, particularly into Africa. Echoing the words of Secretary Rex Tillerson, Africa is a continent of enormous opportunity. As we all know, small businesses face challenges entering into global markets. Many small businesses do not feel prepared to take on such challenges. The 2016 Small Business Exporting Survey found that nearly half of all non-exporting firms surveyed would be interested in exporting if some of their concerns can be addressed. Now, what are these concerns? The top challenges and barriers that small businesses consider that prevent them from exporting are: one, just generally a lack of knowledge and how to go about getting started. We have such a large domestic economy that many businesses just don't consider diversifying their customer base and exporting. Two, concerns over getting paid. Obviously, systems are different, customers are new in different markets, and for the first-time exporter, it can be quite intimidating, the idea of getting that pay cycle stretched beyond their working capital limits might be able to bear. Three, regulatory barriers and complexity. So where should a small business start? Now that's where the SBA can come in and help. Many of you know that the SBA assists small businesses in a number of areas, including access to capital, counseling, contracting, disaster relief, and advocacy. At the Office of International Trade, we straddle all of these areas. The Office of International Trade, the office that both my colleague Eugene Cornelius and I are running, this office is charged by statute to improve small business participation in global markets. Its stated mission involves 1, increasing the number of U.S. small businesses that are exporting, and 2, increasing the volume of U.S. small business exports. Under the leadership of our administrator, Linda McMahon, we address this dual mission by focusing on these 3 critical needs that small businesses have when attempting to export. These needs are 1, the need for information. The SBA recognizes that guidance and support for small businesses is crucial to achieving a foothold in the international marketplace. As such, our office has a network of 21 export finance managers that are based in U.S. Export Assistance Centers. These U.S. Export Assistance Centers are otherwise known as USAADO, and they are located all around the country. They provide counseling on international payment risks and the procedures that U.S. government exports, involving U.S. government exports. 2, there's a need for capital. Small businesses cannot trade or export to new markets unless they have access to capital. Specifically, that means trade finance. Small businesses are hardest hit by the gaps in trade financing. By illustration, according to the International Chamber of Commerce report on global market conditions for trade finance, over half of all declined trade finance requests to banks were submitted by small businesses. Over half that were declined were small businesses. In the United States, over 1/3 of all small businesses find financing harder to obtain for foreign sales than for domestic sales. So this is a real challenge. This is a barrier to exporting. And given this challenge, the SBA works with lenders to provide tailored trade finance loan guarantees so that small businesses can finance their foreign sales and growth. SBA's 3 targeted trade finance loan guarantee programs are 1, the Export Express program, 2, the Export Working Capital program, and 3, the International Trade Loan. All these 3 programs are designed to support small businesses throughout the exporter life cycle, from developing new markets to financing export transactions to expanding plant and equipment due to exporting success. Now, I know that my colleague Eugene will be getting a little more in depth with these, but we'll also be able to answer questions, and there'll be a site to direct you to more information about all these financing programs. Now, for financing up to $500,000, the Export Express Loan Guarantee Program can help small businesses receive a revolving line of credit or a fixed-term loan to meet the diverse needs of a new-to-export company. The Export Express loan is specifically for new-to-export companies, and the use of the proceeds is widest. It can be used for anything related to exporting. The Export Working Capital Program can provide small businesses with the flexibility to receive financing for a single transaction or for sales to buyers located all over the world up to $5 million with a guarantee to the local bank. So this is a slightly larger line of credit, and it is for more experienced exporters. For the most experienced exporters, however, we have the International Trade Loan Program, and this provides a term loan for property, plant, and equipment or working capital up to $5 million with a 90% bank guarantee. So typically, this is for exporters that have had great success exporting to other countries and that are looking to expand their operations, building more plant and equipment. These programs can support the issuance of standby letters of credit, forbid, advance payment, and performance guarantees. I know our Deputy Associate Administrator, Eugene Cornelius, will be giving you more in-depth information on SBA's finance programs following my remarks. Now, the third need that small businesses have in order to be able to export is a need for market access. They have to be able to find customers overseas. The SBA emphasizes the importance of small business export promotion by strengthening its partnership with state and territory governments through something that is called the State Trade Expansion Program, otherwise known as STEP. The State Trade Expansion Program provides financial awards on a competitive basis to state and territory governments so that their small businesses can participate in overseas trade opportunities that include matchmaking services, trade missions, and trade shows. This is all about acquiring new customers overseas. And because the Office of International Trade is also charged by statute with ensuring that the interests of small businesses are adequately represented in bilateral and multilateral trade negotiations, we actively participate in developing small business beneficial trade commitments for transparency, flexibility, and evidence-based decision-making so that foreign regulations do not unnecessarily burden U.S. small business exporters. What does that mean? That means that we are involved in the trade negotiations like that, those happening right now for NAFTA. We have specialists who advocate on behalf of small businesses that are hand in hand with the U.S. trade representatives that are negotiating with Mexico and with Canada on the NAFTA. And we do this with all trade negotiations. They look out for small businesses first because small businesses are most exposed to the high costs that come from unclear regulations, unclear customs agreement, or any type of excessive confusion or complexity. President Trump and the administration are committed to expanding trade with countries in Africa that are dedicated to open markets and ensuring a level playing field for U.S. firms to pursue commercial opportunities in Africa. At the core of the U.S. policy towards Africa is a burgeoning trade relationship that will benefit both U.S. and African exporters and service providers. And I say that with an understanding that there is a great differentiation among the African countries, as was indicated by Mr. Hazelwood. It is absolutely true. Economic growth that results in more jobs and economic opportunities for the United States and also for the different African countries manifestly works to our mutual advantage. The SBA is committed to seeing trade and development with African countries prosper. We have a large African diaspora communities throughout the United States, and they are eager to connect with their kinsmen through trade. Since the year 2000, the SBA has had a role in helping bridge the trade and development gap through many programs and partnerships that we formed with Nigeria, with Botswana, South Africa, Ghana, Liberia, and Tunisia. Most recently, the SBA has hosted the African Women's Entrepreneurship Program delegation, which focuses on access to capital, counseling, and training and technical assistance for women that wish to do business in Africa. Now to conclude, I wish to say that under the able leadership of our administrator, Linda McMahon, the SBA will be committed to ensuring that all our small business exporters find all the support they need to expand into Africa and all international markets. I believe the SBA and policymakers, business leaders, scholars, and members of civil society groups can work together to lend a helping hand to entrepreneurs who want to grow from local entrepreneurship, from becoming a local entrepreneur to a global entrepreneur, and create mutually beneficial business opportunities in both the United States and Africa. I want to invite all of you to learn more about SBA's international programs through our Office of International Trade in Washington, D.C., or through our network of 21 U.S. export finance managers that are based in the U.S. export assistance centers throughout this country. For more information on our programs, you can find it on our website at www.sba.gov/OIT for Office of International Trade. So I really do wish to thank you for the opportunity again to speak today. It was a thrill to be able to speak at Yale University, my alma mater, and I wish you to enjoy the rest of your conference. Of course, I'm available to answer questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kazanias. Any questions?
Thank you again for coming down and speaking on behalf of the SBA from International Trade.
It's a pleasure.
You and Eugene. So are there any sort of grassroots efforts with your regular type businesses that you guys have in your short or long range planning to focus on? I know you spoke about it in general. Are there any initiatives that you're looking at, you know, that regular guy, that regular small business to get into to do some international trade?
Well, let me tell you about, let me answer it from two angles. First, there's a program that's actually in place that really does touch the grassroots. And there's another program that is actually still in its conception. It's still inchoate. and we are still working and thinking about how to go about doing it. The first is, I alluded to it in my talk, it was the State Trade Expansion Program. Now the way it works, unfortunately, we're a little removed because we are the federal government. We have to give money to state government agencies. It is the state government export agencies that are really closest to the ground and understand who their businesses that wish to export are. So a lot of state export promotion agencies work with small local businesses and find who the exporters are. The STEP program provides financial awards and grants. So that small business, right, that small business that wants to do exporting will have to take money out to go overseas and do a trade mission in China, in Nigeria, in Botswana, wherever. And they go to these trade missions and go to conferences where they make contacts with local businesses with whom they might wish to trade. What the STEP program does is it reimburses these small businesses up to 50% of their cost of taking on these trade missions. Obviously, it costs money to make money, and one of the costs of money is actual business development and making those contacts. We work through the state promotion agencies, the state export promotion agencies, who really are more in contact with the small business. The second issue that I wanted to talk about is this issue that we are still working on, and we are not sure, we're focused, it's part of our strategy. I wrote it into our strategy for fiscal year 2018, but it's still in COET, it's still in formation. And that's this idea of diaspora communities. You know, there are diaspora communities all over the United States. African diaspora, Latin American diaspora, Asian diaspora, and so forth. There is the Minority Business Development Association, which I believe is part of the Department of Commerce. They've worked on this for many, many years, right? We are liaising with them because they have 4 different major centers. There's a diaspora, there's an MBDA center in California, largely focused, I believe, on China for trade. There's one in Texas focused on Latin America. There's one in Miami that is focused on the Caribbean, and one in Chicago focused on Africa. We're trying to figure out ways of collaborating and doing a joint program that might be able to touch some of these local entrepreneurs and local businesses that have familial ties with their ancestral homelands, because for them, there is a much smaller psychological gap to be able to overcome to trade and become more sophisticated exporters than the non-diaspora community type member. So this is something that we're working on, and one of the reasons I wanted to come here and give this speech, because we're looking to learn and see where the opportunities may lie for further collaboration and building up to be able to touch that local entrepreneur. Yes. Thank you.
Among the general population in America, there's a general perception that the continent is very risky. And this goes back to the first question you had, the first point you had raised, the lack of knowledge. It is true there's a lot of instability on the continent. On the other hand, how do we disabuse the minds of most people that, look, it's a huge continent and there are pockets of opportunities there. And so the return to risk is quite attractive. And as a follow-up, you know, this is what we as a group, we hope can bring to the table in helping the government to navigate what to outsiders might appear to be a risky place, but relatively say no riskier than any other place in the world. So what are you doing to disabuse people's minds, and what role, what can we do to help the government do this?
You know, I think that's a great question. That's a really great question. I think one of the best avenues to be able to help people overcome of this risk perception, the barrier that's created by this risk perception, is to promote positive stories of businesses that have really thrived in doing business with Africa. We have obviously done a number of, we have the SBA, the opportunity to award Small Business Entrepreneur of the Year awards. And I don't have the information, because again, I've only been here for 4 months, so I don't have the deep institutional knowledge. But I think one of the things that we have done in the past is to promote businesses that have done Exporter of the Year awards, that have done business with Africa or with a particular region to highlight the success story of being able to, of doing business with that region. Because like you say, it really is a very favorable risk-return ratio. And I think that's one of the things that we can do at the SBA to try to improve this, to improve the visibility of that option.
Can you answer a question for me?
Yes, of course. I'll try.
Participated in the STEP program, actually.
Yes.
This summer in South Africa, where I have an office in Cape Town. And we're trying to go through the process of working with one of the 21 centers, in particular in Texas.
Fantastic.
With Halal.
Halal Aleo
Yes.
in Dallas?
Yes.
He's fantastic.
Yes. And so I guess it's kind of a tricky, dicey thing in between, because we're on ground, we are exporting, we're trying to go after the working capital portion of the exporting guarantee,
Okay.
the 90% portion of that. And can you just share with, because I don't know a lot of people, but I just learned this in Nashville about 2 weeks ago.
ASBC's conference, yeah.
Yes, at the ABC conference. I am a advisor here in Connecticut. The threshold between the 7A program that only gives 75% guarantee versus how do you get the true 90% guarantees? Because a lot of companies, I think, are unaware of
Sure.
those two-step processes.
Right. Well, the 7A program and the Export Working Capital program is a program that is for, the Export Working Capital program is for people who wish to export, but it is very, and I'll let Eugene actually talk about this in a little more detail, but it is transaction-based. It's on a project-by-project base. So usually I believe most of that funding is backed or collateralized by the short-term assets of the different, of that given project or transaction. The International Working Capital Program, that's where you get the 90% guarantee. And that is a very specific use of the proceeds, not on a project-by-project basis, but specifically for building out plant and equipment. So the 90% guarantee, is obviously very nice to have a 90% guarantee on a $5 million loan, but the use of the proceeds are rather restricted and narrow. So that is the main difference between those two programs. The Export Working Capital Program, where you might want liquidity for, working capital liquidity or any other types of short-term needs, the wider the use of the proceeds, the lower the guarantee. Not lower the guarantee, but you're not going to get the 90%, you'll get the 75%. Eugene is going to talk about that one more in depth, and we'll want to connect with you anyway, because you're working with the program.
Yeah, can I just comment that Mr. Kazamia's job is like to give the big overview. After lunch, Mr. Cornelius will go more in-depth in the access to capital from the perspective of the SBA. Any other question? I have one myself.
Of course.
I'm glad you guys are here. I really mean it. I'm glad you guys are here. It's been a positive experience working with your department to actually have you here. We've had an ongoing relationship. This is not necessarily it pertains to SBA, but another U.S. government agency, the Commerce Department. 2 years ago, their Deputy Assistant Secretary for Europe, Middle East, and Africa was actually the keynote speaker at this conference. This time around, we've not had some good luck. It's not been very easy working with them to bring them here. And there's some thinking as to whether it's because of the shift in the Trump administration's interest in Africa, or it's just that, for some reason they couldn't come here. So your comment kind of corrects that a little bit, but there is this kind of concern that people have as a result of some of the things that have been said during the campaign and so on and so forth. My question is, what do you say to people who have this concern that this particular administration might be veering away from Africa and doing business in Africa?
Well, let me address both the first, the sort of the precursor to your question, and the second with a very sort of immediate and direct issue. I am a political appointee. It was me who wanted to come here specifically and drove the decision to come here. What may be happening at Commerce, and I can't speak to it, is that there is a great deal of turnover in personnel because there has been such a slow movement to get the new people inside. My sense, it is very much more related to the logistical difficulty in getting the right people into the right positions to make those kinds of decisions than it is an actual orientation of where the policy is focused. Because the SBA, we are a bit more nimble, we're smaller. So in that sense, I think you get the true beat or the true pulse of where the administration is focusing with us, because we were able to fill our positions much more quickly. The fact that it was my desire, without any question, without very much prodding at all from Mr. Dixon, I think is more representative of actually where the administration is oriented.
I'm encouraged by that. If there are no more, okay.
Would you permit me to make a comment?
Of course.
Okay. Look, I would encourage you, if you're interested in doing international business, when I emphasize doing research, one of the first things you should do is to go to the government agencies. It's a wealth of information and a wealth of support. You go there first. And if they can't help you, then you look elsewhere. But believe me, so take advantage of these two gentlemen who are here today.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Hazel. Heartfelt privilege to be here.
Thank you very much.
My name is McCauley, and I do business as Lightsource Productions. I provide professional services in the area of strategic video communications. First, what we do is we help you craft your message using what I call the rule of the 5 W's: who, what, when, where, and why. We do event documentation, content acquisition, full-scale productions, editing, and of course distribution through our social media television network. And with social media, video is more important now than it has ever been. Whether you're talking big business, small business, nonprofit, church, or just an individual. Let's say you plan you're planning an event, a wedding, whatever the case may be, but let's say a big event, but no video. And you spent all this time, all these hours to put this event on, and maybe 100, 200 people attend the event. But more important than that is that thousands could attend by watching it on social media. But of course, you don't think about this until after the event is over. You can't afford not to capture it for social media. And despite what people think, I am affordable. Give me a call. Let's plan your next video project and share it with the world on my social media television network. I promise you that you will have the attention of one person, me.